I stood at the kitchen window, clutching the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The news was still ringing in my ears. My mother, Evelyn, had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. The doctor's words echoed in my mind, painting a grim picture of the few months she had left. Mark, my husband of 33 years, sat at the dining table, his eyes glued to his laptop. I cleared my throat, the weight of the news making it hard to speak. "Mark, we need to talk." He barely glanced up. "What is it, Anna?" "It's my mother. She's dying. The doctors give her 6 months at most." A flicker of annoyance crossed Mark's face before he masked it with indifference. "Sorry to hear that. What do you want to do?" I took a deep breath. "I want to bring her here, to live with us. She shouldn't be alone." Mark's eyes finally met mine, cold and unyielding. "Here? With us? I don't think that's a good idea, Anna." I felt a surge of disbelief. "She's my mother, Mark. She has nowhere else to go." He shrugged. "Why not a hospice? They're better equipped to handle these things." I was about to protest when Emily, Mark's sister, chimed in from the living room. "Or that old tool shed in the backyard. Plenty of space there." Their laughter cut through me like a knife. Tears pricked my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had known Mark to be insensitive, but this was a new low, even for him. I tried to argue, to reason with them, but it was like talking to a brick wall. They had made up their minds, showing a side of themselves so vile, so devoid of empathy, it left me reeling. That night, as I lay in bed, a resolve began to form within me. This was not just about finding a place for my dying mother. It was about standing up to the callousness that had crept into my life, unchallenged for far too long. I didn't know it then, but this was the beginning of my journey towards reclaiming my life. A journey that would lead me down paths I never imagined I would tread. As I drifted off to sleep, a plan began to take shape in my mind. A plan that would not only secure a dignified final chapter for my mother, but also serve as a reckoning for those who had wronged us. Mark and Emily had shown their true colors, and it was time they understood the consequences. The days of being overlooked and dismissed were over. I was Anna, and I was no longer going to be the silent sufferer in my own story. The days following the conversation about my mother were a blur of grief and anger. Evelyn passed away only a month after her diagnosis, her last days spent in a sterile hospital room, not the warmth of our home. I couldn't shake off the guilt that gnawed at me. I had failed her. During this turbulent time, Mark's cough, which he had always brushed off as nothing, worsened. A visit to the doctor revealed the cruel twist of fate. Mark was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. The irony of the situation was not lost on me. I remember the evening he told me. He sat across from me, a shadow of his usual self-assured persona. "Anna, I have cancer," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I stared at him, my mind racing. "What are you saying?" "I need you, Anna. I need you to take care of me." The audacity of his request left me speechless. This was the same man who had coldly suggested a tool shed for my dying mother. Anger bubbled inside me, a fierce burning rage. "Take care of you?" I repeated, my voice laced with bitterness. "Like you took care of my mother." Mark winced. "That's different, Anna. I'm your husband." The conversation spiraled into an argument with Mark playing the victim and me, the heartless wife. Emily joined in, her words sharp and accusing. "How can you be so cruel, Anna? He's dying." I looked at them, really looked at them. Mark with his self-pitying gaze, and Emily, her loyalty to her brother overshadowing any shred of morality. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. I spent the next few days in a haze, planning and preparing. I sought legal advice, gathered documents, and made arrangements. My resolve solidified with each step. I was going to divorce Mark, sell the house, his precious house, and start anew. The day I confronted them, I felt an unfamiliar sense of power. "I'm leaving you, Mark," I declared, my voice steady. "You can't be serious," Mark sputtered, disbelief etched on his face. "I've never been more serious," I replied. "I'm selling the house. It's mine, after all, a part of my inheritance." Emily's face drained of color. "You can't do this to us, Anna. Where will we go?" "That's not my concern anymore," I said, turning to leave. "You should have thought about that before you turned your backs on my mother." I walked away from them, from the life I had known, embarking on a journey of retribution. The time for being the dutiful, silent wife was over. I was going to make them pay for their callousness, their utter disregard for anything other than themselves. The weeks following my decision to divorce Mark were a whirlwind of activity. I met with lawyers, sorted through financial documents, and most importantly, began to peel back the layers of deceit in my marriage. The more I uncovered, the clearer the picture became of a life built on lies and manipulation. One afternoon, as I sifted through old files, I stumbled upon something unexpected. A letter from my mother, tucked away in an old family album. Her familiar handwriting caught my breath. It was dated a few years back, a time when she was still healthy and full of life. The letter was a revelation. My mother, in her wisdom, had seen through Mark and Emily. She wrote of overhearing a conversation, a snippet of dialogue that suggested their relationship was not what it seemed. My hands trembled as I read her words, a mixture of sadness and anger filling me. With this new information, I hired a private investigator. The findings were shocking, yet somehow unsurprising. Emily was not Mark's sister, but his mistress, a fact cleverly hidden for years under the guise of familial bonds. I confronted them on a rainy Thursday evening. The look on their faces when I revealed my knowledge was worth everything I had endured. "Emily, or should I say your mistress," I began, my voice cold and unyielding. "How long did you think you could fool me?" Mark's face turned ashen. "Anna, I can explain." "Save it," I cut him off. "I know everything. The lies, the deceit. It ends now." Emily tried to interject, her voice shrill with panic. "Anna, please, we can work this out." "There's nothing to work out," I said firmly. "I'm divorcing Mark and selling the house. You both need to find somewhere else to live." Their pleas and protests fell on deaf ears. I was done being the victim, the enabler of their twisted game. This was my moment of retribution, and I relished it. As I walked away from that confrontation, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was no longer bound by the chains of a loveless marriage. I was free to start anew, to live a life that was truly my own. The day I signed the papers to sell the house marked a turning point in my life. I watched as Mark and Emily's facades crumbled, their true selves laid bare in the harsh light of reality. The house, once a symbol of our shared life, was now a beacon of my newfound independence. Mark and Emily tried to resist the sale, throwing legal jargon and empty threats my way. But I stood firm, backed by a solid legal team and the ironclad will left by my mother. "You can't do this to us, Anna. This is our home." Emily's voice was laced with desperation. "It ceased being a home the moment you turned it into a house of lies," I replied, my voice unwavering. Mark's pleas were no more effective. "Anna, think about what you're doing. You're destroying everything we have. Everything we had was built on deceit. I'm simply reclaiming what's rightfully mine," I retorted. The day the house sold, I watched as they packed their belongings, their faces etched with defeat. It was not the joy of their misfortune that I felt, but rather a sense of justice. They had reaped what they sowed, a fitting retribution for their heartlessness. With the sale proceeds and my inheritance, I secured a comfortable apartment in a serene neighborhood. It was a fresh start, a place untainted by the past's shadows. As I settled into my new life, I occasionally heard news of Mark and Emily. They had fallen on hard times, struggling to adjust to life without the luxuries they had so freely enjoyed at my expense. I sometimes wondered if I had gone too far. But then I remembered the pain and betrayal, the cold indifference they had shown my mother. No, this was karma in its purest form. I had learned a hard lesson about trust and the masks people wear. But more importantly, I had learned about my strength and resilience. I was no longer the same woman who had tolerated their cruelty. I was Anna, a woman who had faced her demons and emerged victorious. In my new apartment, surrounded by silence and solitude, I found peace. The chaos and deceit that had defined my life with Mark felt like a distant memory. I filled my days with small joys and rediscovered hobbies long forgotten. One day, I received an invitation to the shareholders' meeting of the company where Mark worked. Holding a significant number of shares inherited from my parents, I realized I had more power than I had ever imagined. At the meeting, I sat among the other shareholders, a sense of surrealism washing over me. Mark was there too, looking older and more defeated than ever. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw a flicker of something, regret, perhaps, or fear. During the meeting, I raised my voice, not in vengeance, but in advocacy for fair and ethical business practices. It was what my father would have wanted, and it felt right. After the meeting, Mark approached me, a hesitant figure. "Anna, can we talk?" I looked at him, the man who had been my life for so long, now a stranger. "There's nothing left to say, Mark. But Anna, I'm sorry. I never meant for things to go this far." His apology, though perhaps sincere, came too late. "You made your choices, Mark. Now, live with them." As I walked away, leaving Mark standing alone, I felt a final thread of connection sever. I was no longer bound by his actions or his choices. I was free. In the months that followed, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Mark's health was declining. Emily had left him, unable to cope with the financial and emotional burdens. Despite everything, I felt no joy in his suffering. Vengeance had been mine, but it was a hollow victory. I chose to focus on the future, on building a life filled with meaning and purpose. I volunteered, traveled, and even started writing a memoir. My story was one of pain and betrayal, but also of resilience and renewal. As I sat by my window one evening, pen in hand, I realized that my journey had brought me more than just retribution. It had brought me back to myself. In the reflection of the glass, I saw a woman transformed, no longer defined by the shadows of her past.